So in terms of longevity, how does nutrition play a role in longevity?
I feel like food is one of the most, if not important, factors when it comes to aging. And it's one of the things that we can control, right? For the longest time, we've thought about what goes into our food, about what we're eating, and we have given such little thought to how we're processing it. And finally, I feel like that conversation is coming to light. And just last year, there was an NHANES study looking at biological aging, and they found that for every 10% of a diet that was attributed to ultra processed foods, the person was, or people were a quarter of a year older biologically. And I found that to be really interesting because the average American diet is 60% ultra processed foods. And what's even crazier is the average American child's diet is over 70% ultra processed foods. And the reason why that's just important is because it highlights that there's a connection between food processing and aging. And it's just a conversation that's never been had. And it's interesting for me because as someone who's been in the space now for, 13 years, I've seen the progression from all these different diet trends, right? We've gone from
Kale salads,
kale
kale
salads,
smoothies.
Foreman grill, low carb, Atkins, keto. Oh God, can you even
Yeah,
name all of that?
the
Vegan
Atkins
versus
diet.
carnivore. And yet, throughout all of this, we've spent more money than we ever have had on health and wellness, and so many different trends. And yet, we have actually lowered our lifespan by 3 years here in the U.S. Overall, our average lifespan has gone down over the years, despite all of our effort. And I think a lot of people who do these trends, they get really disappointed. And there's this question that's what are we missing, right? There has to be something is amiss. If all of these things that we're doing, the spending, the investment in health and wellness, and all these diet trends are not working out, there has to be a piece of the puzzle that's missing. And to me, that piece of the puzzle is, what happens between farm and fork. There is an invisible piece that happens when you harvest something at a farm to when it finally goes on your fork and you're eating it for dinner. And because you're also someone who's heavily involved in cooking and food, that the way we process things affects how the food turns out, right? For me, that relates back to what I was studying as a PhD student about how cooking methods can influence our aging and age-related diseases.
With your background in the CPG world,
Yeah.
you've got to see a little bit. I assume you've gotten to see how that works because, you create a product is one thing, but creating it for packaging and making it shelf stable and getting it into the consumer's homes in a way that still retains nutrients, I'm sure that was part of your thought process.
For sure. And like I said, I'm consistent. And back then, I was thinking a lot about processing. And I actually think a sleeper great food that you can get that for cheap is flash frozen produce, because what they do is they harvest it and they lock in all of that nutrition right after harvest by flash freezing it, and then it goes straight to the freezer where you purchase it eventually. And in that sense, you're getting nutrients that are locked in. And I really didn't like the idea of feeding my daughter, something that had been processed so much, like those pouches. A lot of those things have been boiled down to a syrup. There's literally no nutrition left, and it's like dead food at that point. I didn't want to feed that to my daughter, and so that's why I came up with the concept for Raise Real.
What is flash freezing?
Flash freezing is an industrial process where it's very, very cold, and they just lock in all of that nutrition early on because it's so cold.
Is that done with liquid nitrogen, or is that done with a cold freezer?
I would I don't know about how it is now. Back then it was mostly just a cold freezer.
Just done as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So essentially when you freeze something, it just locks in the nutrients? It doesn't denature them at all?
Because you're doing it so quickly, you're essentially freezing it at the condition that it was harvested at. Whereas if you were to freeze something in your freezer, it takes a longer time. Sometimes there's some water leakage that happens and, more denaturing because it's essentially like taking longer to freeze. And with the industrial process, you're just freezing something very quickly. And if you look at peas, right, when you buy them flash frozen, each one is individually frozen because it's like so cold that it didn't form a block of ice by the time you got it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that idea of flash freezing, but preceding that is picking produce and vegetables when they're ripe, when they're maxed out on nutrients, right? And the time, like the conventional, let's say a tomato, for example, we're leaning into tomato season. When a tomato is picked from a farm, it has to get transported to distribution centers, and then those get repacked and then shipped to different grocery stores. By the time that tomato gets from the farm to our homes, I feel like the nutritional value has just been depleted.
For sure. I mean, the average, if I can remember the stat, it's been a while. I think the average apple in the grocery store is over a year old.
What?
Yeah.
No way.
That is like for sure and crazy. It's a crazy fact. They've done studies, vitamin C studies on foods that have been harvested and sold at grocery stores, and the vitamin C retention, which is supposed to be a proxy for how fresh something is, because the more fresh something is, the higher vitamin C content it's supposed to have. It's pretty low in certain foods because of the shipping, right? And the time it takes to transport something. In flash frozen produce, it's actually quite high because, again, you're kind of like suspending it at that moment in time right after harvest instead of waiting all that time to, for shipment. With apples, it's just kind of a crazy thing. I can't speak for every apple producer, but on average, it's like a known fact that the average apple is over a year old.
That's insane.
Yeah.